Has there ever been a specific event in your life that pushed you to share how you feel with others? As we examine the things they carried through a new historical lens, we observe that this question applies to Tim O'Brien and his feelings of the Vietnam War. New historical lenses are based on the idea that literature should be studied within the history of the author and the history of the critic. This critical lens also provides that authors are greatly influenced by the time period in which they live in, and that their work is a direct reflection of their influences. When applying new historicism to the things they carried, there are certain characteristics that may be applied, including his influences, the impact his work had on society, and his political views. Throughout his lifetime, Tim O'Brien lived through two important events: the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement. His work mainly was derived by his time in Vietnam, which pushed him to share his feelings about the war. Before O'Brien left for war, he was also strongly influenced by other American authors growing up, such as Norman Mailer and Philip Roth, who wrote novels about a fictional character but used their real names. In a source about O'Brien's influences, he mentions that Norman Mailer, whose first book, The Naked and the Dead, is a realistic war novel set in the Pacific theater of World War II. He created a fictionalized, buffoonish version of himself as a Vietnam War protester. These writers inspired Tim O'Brien to write a war novel like The Naked and Dead and The Armies of the Night. Tim O'Brien's work has a tremendous impact on society, both then and now. His work departed from normal conventions. O'Brien switched the paradigm by using a new method where he tells his audience that stories invent reality through the story truth and happening truth. Significant claims were made in the things they carried when he says that the stories that are made up have a larger significance than stories that tell the truth. This made scholars extremely confused, since this left them wondering if a story in the things they carried was happening truth or story truth. O'Brien offers clarity on what he deemed to be realistic story by writing that a true war story is never moral. It does not instruct nor encourage virtue, nor suggests models of proper human behavior on page 65 of The Things They Carried.
One source stated that he will follow up by telling his listeners that the story they just heard was completely made up. Unsure whether they are angry or intrigued about O'Brien's confession, audience members are usually left unsettled, not knowing quite what to think. This reflects life in the 1960s, as it was a very frightening and confusing time. War is nothing new to O'Brien, as he had parents who both served in the Navy, yet he maintains a clear opposition to the Vietnam War. This is to be expected due to him being one of many individuals who was the most affected by the draft in 1969. Similar to O'Brien, many of the men who were drafted were fresh out of school. If a draft notice was given to an individual that was not in college, then they were forced to go to war, and those who did try to ignore this notice faced consequences such as major jail time. This provided a cause for protest and activism. In an article by Eric Schmidt, Tim O'Brien did work for various anti-war factions, and his activism served to solidify his liberal view. This included going door to door and handing out literature which advocated voters to vote for an anti-war candidate. Tim O'Brien, as a real-life author and a fictional character, expresses an inner conflict that takes place upon receiving a draft notice. In the novel, this anti-war sentiment is articulated when he mentions, "In June of 1968, a month after graduating from Macalester College, I was drafted to fight a war I hated," on page 38 of The Things They Carried. The novel also expresses O'Brien's convictions of the war when he reflects on the chapter "The Man That I Killed" and during his stay at the Tip Top Lodge. This is indicative of how O'Brien's views helped to shape the things they carried and his own character in the book. In closing, O'Brien's influences, impacts, and views all help to define what it meant to be a Vietnam soldier. By using the historical lens, there is a clear reflection of the time that Tim O'Brien lived through. While The Things They Carried was written nearly 28 years ago, it still remains relevant to understand the past.